One freezing winter night, a struggling black restaurant owner made a decision that would either destroy his last chance at saving his dying business or reveal the true meaning of family. When he saw a homeless grandmother and her sick grandson shivering outside his restaurant, he had seconds to choose between his financial survival and their lives. What happened next would shatter everything he thought he knew about success, family, and what it means to truly live. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe, give this video a like, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from. Now, let's begin. The fluorescent lights of Romano's family kitchen buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the stack of crimson-colored bills that seemed to multiply like cancer cells on Vincent Romano's desk. His father's weathered chef's knife lay beside the papers, its blade catching the light like an accusation. The numbers on the page blurred as exhaustion weighed down his eyelids, but the message was crystal clear. He was 3 weeks away from losing everything. "I'm sorry, Papa," Vincent whispered to the empty restaurant, his voice echoing off walls that had once been filled with laughter and the clatter of busy service. He picked up the knife that had been passed down through 3 generations, feeling the weight of legacy and failure in his palm. "I couldn't keep your dream alive." The silence pressed against him like a physical force, broken only by the wheeze of an ancient refrigerator that had seen better decades. Outside, snow began to fall on streets that barely brought customers anymore. The corporate chains had slowly strangled his business until Romano's stood like a monument to a forgotten way of life. Vincent locked the door and stepped into the bitter cold, wondering if tomorrow he'd still have keys to turn. At the corner of Hudson Street, 2 figures huddled against a brick wall under a blanket so thin it might as well have been tissue paper. An elderly black woman clutched a small boy to her chest, both of them shaking in the wind that cut through their inadequate clothes like knives. Vincent slowed, something in their desperate embrace stopping him cold. The shape of people with absolutely nowhere left to go. "Nana, I'm so cold," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind. The words hit Vincent like a punch to the chest. He stood frozen, staring at 2 souls abandoned by the world, clinging to each other as though their bond was the only thing keeping them tethered to life. Something deep inside him cracked open. For months, he had felt his own despair gnawing at him from the inside. But this was different. This was worse. He still had walls, still had a roof, still had 4 burners that worked when he could afford the gas. These 2 had nothing but each other and the clothes on their backs. Vincent stepped closer, his boots crunching against the ice, and spoke in the gentlest voice he could manage. "You don't have to be out here tonight. I own that place right there," he said, pointing back toward the flickering neon sign of Romano's family kitchen. "It's closed, but I can still make something hot for both of you. You can warm up inside." The woman's arms tightened protectively around the boy, her chin lifting in defiance that couldn't quite mask the desperation in her eyes. "We don't need charity," she said, her voice proud despite the circumstances. But even as she spoke, Vincent could see the way her hands shook, could hear the chattering of the child's teeth. Vincent exhaled slowly, his breath curling into the frigid night air. He wanted to argue, to tell her it wasn't charity, it was just human decency. But before he could find the words, the boy stirred again, his wide eyes flicking between his grandmother and Vincent. This time, his small voice carried a plea that cut through all pretense. "Please, Nana. I'm so cold I can't feel my fingers." The woman's shoulders sagged under the weight of that fragile voice. Her resolve crumbled like old mortar, and she gave the smallest nod. Almost imperceptible, but enough. Vincent extended his arm and led them across the empty street, their footsteps the only sound in the winter silence. When he unlocked the door and pushed it open, warmth spilled out like an embrace. He guided them to a booth near the old heater, then disappeared into the kitchen. His hands moved on autopilot, chopping, stirring, heating broth, the rhythm of survival he had learned at his father's side. The familiar motions steadied him, gave him purpose in a moment when everything else felt uncertain. Minutes later, he emerged with 2 steaming bowls of minestrone soup, the recipe his grandmother had brought from Sicily decades ago. The boy's eyes lit up like Christmas morning, his small hands wrapping clumsily around the spoon as he slurped eagerly. The woman hesitated, pride warring with hunger, before finally taking a cautious sip. She closed her eyes, exhaling softly. "It's good," she whispered, and Vincent felt something ease in his chest for the first time in months as he watched them eat. But when the bowls were empty and silence returned, reality crashed back down. Sending them back into that snow would be like signing their death warrant. Vincent cleared his throat, gesturing toward the hallway behind the kitchen. "There's a storage room back there," he said quietly. "It's got a couch, some old blankets. Not much, but it's warmer than the street. Stay here tonight." The woman looked up sharply, tears threatening to spill from eyes that had seen too much hardship. Her mouth opened as though to refuse, but the boy tugged her sleeve, eyes pleading silently. She swallowed hard, nodded once, and whispered, "Thank you." In that moment, Vincent felt something stir inside him that he hadn't felt in years. Not relief, not joy, but a fragile sense that maybe, just maybe, he hadn't failed at everything that mattered. Because sometimes the biggest home isn't built with 4 walls and a roof. Sometimes it's built in the heart of someone who has nothing left but still chooses to give. The morning light crept through the windows of Romano's family kitchen like fingers searching for hope. Outside, the street lay quiet under a blanket of pristine snow. Inside, something fundamental had shifted. When Vincent unlocked the door and stepped in, expecting the same cluttered disaster he had left the night before, he froze in complete shock. The place was immaculate. Every chair stood perfectly tucked beneath spotless tables. The windows, once cloudy with accumulated grime, gleamed in the weak sunlight like they were brand new. Even the counter where bills had piled up like accusations now stood clear, the papers organized in neat stacks. The floor looked as though someone had scrubbed every single tile by hand. Vincent set his keys down slowly, his calloused fingers brushing against the pristine counter surface. This was not how he had left it. From the back room came the rustle of fabric and the soft voice of a child humming. He walked toward the storage room, his boots echoing against the spotless floor. When he pushed the door open, he found them. The elderly woman knelt on the floor, folding cleaning rags with methodical precision. Beside her, the boy sat cross-legged on the couch, his head bent over a piece of paper, tongue poking out in concentration. "Look what we did," the boy cried the moment he saw Vincent, his face lighting up with pure joy. He held up his drawing with both hands. "We cleaned everything. Nana said if we're staying, we should help make it nice. And I made this picture for you." The woman rose slowly, brushing dust from her worn skirt. Her eyes met Vincent's with a steadiness that carried both dignity and quiet defiance. "You gave us shelter," she said simply. "The least we could do is treat it with respect." Vincent stepped closer and took the paper from the boy's eager hands. It was a drawing of Romano's family kitchen, but not the dying restaurant he knew. The child had imagined it alive again. Windows glowing with warm light, the doors standing open, tables full of people smiling as they shared meals. Above the entrance, a banner spelled out the name in uneven letters. Romano's family kitchen, where everyone belongs. In the corner, 3 small figures stood together, a man, an elderly woman, and a boy. For a long moment, Vincent couldn't speak. The lump in his throat felt like it might choke him. He looked from the drawing to the boy's hopeful eyes, then to the woman's weathered face, waiting for his reaction. Instead of the irritation or burden he thought he might feel, something entirely different rose inside him. Something small but undeniably real. He let out a slow breath, his voice rough when he finally managed to speak. "Not bad, kid. Not bad at all." The boy's grin could have powered the city. His chest puffed out as though he had just received the highest honor imaginable. The elderly woman's lips curved in what might have been her first genuine smile in years. Vincent turned quickly, reaching for a dish towel to cover the sudden sting in his eyes. He busied himself at the counter, but inside he felt something he hadn't experienced in months. A fragile ember of hope, small but burning steady. The moment shattered with a sharp knock at the front door. It wasn't tentative or polite, but deliberate and hard, making the glass rattle in its frame. Vincent's shoulders squared automatically, every muscle in his body going tense. He tossed the towel aside and walked to the entrance, dread pooling in his stomach. Through the window, he saw a man standing in the cold, expensive coat collar turned up against the wind, breath fogging the glass. Vincent recognized him immediately. Tony Castellano, the loan shark who had been circling Romano's like a vulture for months. Vincent opened the door. Castellano stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his calculating eyes sweeping over the cleaned restaurant with obvious surprise. A smirk played at the corners of his mouth. "Looks cleaner than your books, Romano," he said, voice dripping with mock admiration. "Funny how you can keep a floor shining, but not your accounts current." Vincent's jaw tightened, his grip on the door handle turning his knuckles white. He said nothing. Silence was the only defense he had left against men like Castellano. The loan shark leaned closer, his smirk widening with predatory satisfaction. 2 weeks, he said, tone casual but eyes deadly serious. "Give me my money, or this place stops being yours. Understand?" He tapped his knuckles against the pristine counter with deliberate menace, then turned and walked out, his expensive shoes crunching in the snow as the door swung shut behind him. Vincent stood frozen, his breathing shallow. The weight of those words pressed down on his chest like a stone. He looked down at his hands and saw they were trembling. He clenched them into fists, forcing the shaking to stop. But it wasn't just his hands. The fear, shame, and helpless anger had tangled together deep in his gut, a knot that threatened to drag him under. Behind him, the elderly woman stepped into the doorway, her sharp eyes taking in everything. The way his fingers shook, the way his silence carried the weight of desperation. The boy peeked out from behind her, his young face pale with worry. "Who was that man, Mr. Romano?" he asked softly, innocence making the question cut even deeper. Vincent turned to him quickly, forcing his expression to soften. He crouched down and placed a gentle hand on the boy's thin shoulder, his voice steady despite the way it scraped in his throat. "Don't worry about it, son," he said quietly. "It's nothing you need to think about." The boy nodded, though his eyes continued searching Vincent's face as if trying to decode the fear he could sense but not understand. The woman's gaze remained fixed on him, heavy with unspoken knowledge, but she said nothing. Vincent straightened, picked up the dish towel again, and turned back to the counter. The restaurant was quiet, filled with the lingering scent of lemon cleaner and hope. Sunlight touched the clean tables, but Castellano's threat hung in the air like smoke, cold and suffocating. On the counter lay the boy's drawing. Those 3 little figures standing in front of a bright, thriving Romano's family kitchen, smiling as though nothing in the world could break them apart. Vincent stared at it, his lips pressed tight, and whispered so softly only he could hear, "Not yet, kid. Not yet." The next morning brought the bitter realization that cleaning windows and organizing papers wouldn't pay off loan sharks. Vincent stood behind the counter, staring at the neat stack of bills that still demanded money he didn't have. The words, 2 weeks, echoed in his head like a countdown timer, each tick bringing him closer to losing the last piece of his father's legacy. His eyes drifted to where the boy's drawing lay pinned beneath a salt shaker. In the child's imagination, Romano's family kitchen bustled with life again, tables full of customers, windows glowing with warmth, hope radiating from every corner. The vision clung to him more fiercely than Castellano's threats. For the first time in weeks, Vincent allowed himself to ask, what if? He moved into the kitchen and began cooking with a determination he hadn't felt in months. Soon the pans hissed and sizzled, the aroma of garlic, herbs, and simmering tomato sauce filling the air. He prepared more food than he had cooked in ages, ignoring the voice in his head that warned about wasted supplies and depleted savings. The elderly woman, who had introduced herself as Grace the night before, sat at a table watching him work. Her eyebrows lifted with curiosity and concern. "What are you doing?" she asked, voice steady but cautious. Vincent set down the ladle and wiped his forehead with the back of his wrist. "If they won't come in here," he said with a half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, "we'll go out there." Grace tilted her head, lips pressing together thoughtfully. But before she could respond, the boy, Timothy, he'd told them shyly, jumped up from where he'd been coloring, his dark curls bouncing with excitement. "You mean we're taking the food outside? Like giving it away?" His eyes shone with wonder, small hands clasped together as though he were holding something precious. "Free samples," Vincent said firmly, the plan crystallizing as he spoke. "People walking by might stop, might taste what real food is supposed to be like." He looked at Timothy, his tone softening. "And maybe a few will remember and come back." By late morning, The three of them had set up a small folding table just outside Romano's front doors. The sky was clear, but the cold was sharp, every breath turning into visible puffs of steam. Vincent ladled steaming portions of pasta marinara into small paper cups, while Grace handed them out with quiet dignity. Timothy, wrapped in Vincent's old jacket that hung past his knees, held up hand-drawn signs that read "Free Taste" in crayon letters. At first, people hurried past without slowing, heads down against the cold, focused on their own destinations and problems. Vincent felt his confidence wavering with each dismissive glance, each quickened pace that carried potential customers away from their small table. The food was growing cold, his limited supplies dwindling with nothing to show for the effort. Then an elderly man in a worn coat paused, drawn by the rich smell of authentic Italian cooking. He accepted a small cup with gnarled hands, took a tentative bite, and his weathered face transformed with surprise and pleasure. "Madonna mia," he breathed, his accent thick with old country memories. "This tastes like my grandmother's cooking. Where did you learn to make sauce like this?" Vincent felt his chest tighten with unexpected emotion. "My father taught me. His mother brought the recipe from Sicily." The old man finished the small portion and reached for his wallet. "How much for a full plate?" $12, Vincent said, hardly daring to hope. "I'll take 2. My wife, she'll think she died and went to heaven." Word began to spread in the mysterious way that news travels through neighborhoods. The old man brought his wife back that afternoon. She brought her sister the next day. By the end of the week, Romano's had served more meals than Vincent had cooked in the previous month combined. But success brought its own problems. With only 2 weeks left until Castellano's deadline, Vincent was still nowhere near the $43,000 he owed. The increased business helped, but it couldn't perform miracles. Each night, he counted the day's receipts with growing desperation, watching the impossible gap between what he had and what he needed. Timothy seemed to sense the underlying tension, though he didn't understand its source. He began spending more time creating elaborate drawings of the restaurant filled with customers, as if his artistic vision could will their dream into reality. Grace watched Vincent with increasing concern, noting the way he stared at bills long into the night, the way his shoulders carried weight that seemed to grow heavier each day. One afternoon, while Vincent was in the kitchen preparing for the dinner rush they now actually had, Timothy came running in from the front dining room, his face flushed with excitement and something else, something that made Vincent's stomach clench with instant dread. "Mr. Vincent, there's a really fancy car outside, and some men in suits are looking at our restaurant." Vincent's blood turned to ice water. He wiped his hands quickly and walked to the front window, Timothy close behind. Outside, 3 men in expensive overcoats stood examining the building with the calculating expressions of predators sizing up prey. Vincent recognized one of them immediately, Castellano's associate, the one who handled property acquisitions. Grace appeared beside him, her face grave as she took in the scene. "Friends of the man who came before?" she asked quietly. "Something like that," Vincent said, his voice tight. Timothy tugged on his sleeve, innocent confusion clear in his young face. "Are they customers? Should I make them a welcome sign?" Vincent knelt down to the boy's level, forcing his expression to remain calm despite the panic clawing at his chest. "Why don't you go upstairs and work on your drawings for a while? Grace will make you some hot chocolate." The boy nodded eagerly and bounded toward the stairs. Grace lingered, her eyes full of questions Vincent couldn't answer without shattering the fragile security they had built together. 2 weeks, she said simply. Vincent nodded, unable to trust his voice. That night, after closing, Vincent sat alone in the restaurant counting the day's earnings. $327. A good day by recent standards, but a drop in the ocean compared to what Castellano demanded. Even if business doubled, tripled, he couldn't make up the deficit in time. The mathematics were as cold and unforgiving as the winter wind rattling the windows. He picked up Timothy's latest drawing, the 3 of them standing together in front of a Romano's that blazed with success and warmth. The boy had added new details: families sharing meals, children laughing, couples holding hands across candlelit tables. It was beautiful. It was impossible. It was everything Vincent wanted and couldn't provide. The next morning brought new challenges. As Vincent unlocked the restaurant, he found a notice taped to the door, an official document from the city informing him that his business license was under review due to reported irregularities. He knew immediately that Castellano was tightening the screws, using bureaucratic pressure to make Vincent's situation even more desperate. Grace found him standing in the doorway, the notice crumpled in his fist, his face a mask of barely controlled rage and helplessness. "What is it?" she asked. He handed her the paper without speaking. She read it carefully, her expression growing more grim with each line. When she finished, she looked up at him with eyes that had seen enough of life to understand exactly what this meant. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Maybe a week before they shut us down for the investigation. Maybe less." Timothy's voice called down from upstairs, bright and oblivious. "Is it time for breakfast? Can I help make pancakes today?" Vincent and Grace looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. How do you explain to a child that the home he's just found is about to be taken away? How do you tell an 8-year-old that sometimes love isn't enough to keep a family together? "We'll figure something out," Grace said firmly, but Vincent could hear the doubt underneath her determination. That afternoon, business was slower than usual. Word had somehow gotten out about the license review, and people were wary of eating at a restaurant that might be shut down at any moment. Vincent watched the empty tables and felt the walls closing in around everything he cared about. At 3 o'clock, Timothy collapsed. He had been helping Grace organize receipts at a corner table when suddenly his small body crumpled, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. His skin felt burning hot to the touch, and when Vincent tried to rouse him, the boy's eyes rolled back, showing only white. "Call an ambulance," Vincent shouted, his voice cracking with terror as he gathered Timothy's limp form in his arms. The child felt impossibly light, as though his illness was consuming him from within. Grace was already on the phone, her voice steady despite the fear Vincent could see in her eyes. "Yes, we need paramedics immediately. A child, 8 years old, high fever, unconscious." The minutes that followed felt like hours. Vincent held Timothy against his chest, feeling the boy's labored breathing, whispering reassurances he wasn't sure either of them believed. "Stay with me, son. You're going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay." When the paramedics arrived, they worked with professional efficiency, checking Timothy's vital signs, starting in 4, loading him onto a stretcher. One of them, a woman with kind eyes, touched Vincent's shoulder. "Are you the father?" Vincent looked at Grace, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "I'm his father." At the hospital, they learned the devastating truth. Timothy had pneumonia, complicated by malnutrition and exposure from his weeks on the street before Vincent found them. The doctor, a tired-looking man with compassionate eyes, delivered the news in gentle but direct terms. "He's very sick. We can treat this, but he needs immediate intensive care and medications that are..." He paused diplomatically. "Expensive. How much?" Vincent asked, though he already knew the answer would destroy him. "Without insurance, you're looking at probably $15,000 to $20,000. Maybe more if complications develop." Vincent felt the floor drop out from under him. He sank into a plastic hospital chair, his head in his hands. $20,000. Add that to the $43,000 he owed Castellano, and even selling everything he owned wouldn't be enough. But as he looked through the window at Timothy's small form surrounded by medical equipment, he realized with crystal clarity that none of that mattered. He stood up, walked to the billing office, and signed every form they put in front of him. He authorized the treatment, knowing it would cost him the restaurant, knowing it would probably destroy any chance of paying Castellano, knowing it meant losing everything his father had built. Grace found him in the hallway an hour later, slumped against the wall with tears streaming down his face. "You signed the papers," she said. It wasn't a question. He nodded, unable to speak. She sat down beside him, her weathered hand covering his. "You gave him everything. Your last chance to save the restaurant. You gave it all for a boy you've known for 3 weeks." Vincent lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed but steady. "He's not just any boy," he said hoarsely. "He's my son, and you're my family. That's what family does. We protect each other, no matter what it costs." They spent that night in the hospital, taking turns sitting beside Timothy's bed, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. By morning, the fever had broken and his breathing was easier, but the doctors insisted he needed several more days of treatment to be completely safe. Grace and Vincent sat in the hallway, exhausted but relieved, when reality came crashing back down. Vincent's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Time's up tomorrow, Romano. Have my money or start packing." Grace saw his face change, watched the color drain from his cheeks. "What is it?" He showed her the message. She read it twice, then looked up at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Vincent," she said carefully, "there's something I need to tell you. Something about who Timothy and I really are." Vincent stared at Grace, his exhausted mind struggling to process the weight in her voice. Around them, the hospital hallway buzzed with quiet activity. Nurses making rounds, families visiting patients, the ordinary rhythm of life continuing while his world teetered on the edge of collapse. "I should have told you before," Grace said, her weathered hands clasped tightly in her lap. "But I was afraid. Afraid you'd think differently about us. Afraid you'd see us as charity cases instead of family." Through the window, Vincent could see Timothy sleeping peacefully, his small chest rising and falling steadily, the color finally returning to his cheeks. The sight gave him strength to focus on Grace's words, despite his exhaustion. "My full name is Grace Washington," she continued. "Timothy is my grandson, like I told you. But what I didn't tell you is how we ended up on that street." She paused, gathering courage for what came next. "Timothy's mother, my daughter Sarah, she was a nurse. Good job, nice apartment, everything seemed stable. But 3 years ago, she was driving home from a late shift when a drunk driver ran a red light. She died instantly." Vincent's throat tightened. He had heard similar stories before, but coming from Grace, it felt like a physical blow. Timothy's father couldn't handle it. Just disappeared one day, left all the legal papers on the kitchen table, signing away his parental rights. The coward didn't even say goodbye to his own son. Grace's voice cracked slightly, but she pushed on. "I took Timothy in without question. He was my daughter's baby, my blood. But I was already living on Social Security, barely making ends meet in a one-bedroom apartment. When Timothy started having nightmares, needed therapy, needed so many things I couldn't afford." She pulled a worn envelope from her coat pocket, the same envelope Vincent had seen her clutch protectively since the day they met. There was a settlement from the accident. The drunk driver's insurance company paid out $250,000. I put it all away for Timothy's future, college, maybe a house someday, something to give him the life his mother wanted for him. Vincent stared at the envelope, understanding beginning to dawn like a cold sunrise. "But living on just my Social Security wasn't enough," Grace continued. "I started using little bits of the settlement money for groceries, for Timothy's school supplies, for the therapist who helped him with his nightmares. Just small amounts at first, telling myself it was still for his benefit." Her eyes filled with tears. The months turned into years. Medical bills piled up when Timothy got sick with chronic asthma. The apartment rent kept going up. I had to choose between keeping a roof over our heads and preserving his inheritance. By the time the eviction notice came, I had $50,000 left. Not enough for a new place with first and last month's rent. Not with our credit history and no steady income. Vincent felt pieces clicking into place. "That's why you were on the street." Grace nodded. "I couldn't bring myself to spend the last of Sarah's money on another apartment that I might lose in 6 months. So we ended up with nowhere to go, carrying everything we owned in 2 suitcases and that envelope." She held up the envelope with trembling fingers. $50,000. Every penny I have left in the world. The last piece of my daughter's legacy. The hospital corridor suddenly felt too bright, too loud. Vincent stared at Grace, then at the envelope, understanding the magnitude of what she was telling him, but unable to fully process it. "Grace," he said slowly, "what are you saying?" She stood up, her spine straight with determination that reminded him of the dignity she had shown even while homeless and hungry. "I'm saying that tomorrow, when your loan shark comes calling, he's going to get his money. All of it, plus whatever extra he demands." Vincent shot to his feet. "No, absolutely not. I won't let you." "You won't let me?" Grace's voice carried a strength that stopped his protest cold. "Vincent Romano, you spent your last dime to save my grandson's life. You gave up everything. Your restaurant, your father's legacy, your entire future, because you couldn't bear to see Timothy suffer. She pressed the envelope against his chest, her eyes blazing with fierce love. "This money has been sitting in my purse for 3 years, reminding me every day of what I lost. But you and Timothy, this restaurant, this family we've built, this is what Sarah would have wanted. This is what the money was always supposed to be for." Vincent tried to push the envelope back toward her, but Grace held firm. "I can't take this. It's Timothy's inheritance, his college fund, his future. His future is right here." Grace gestured around them, her voice rising with passion. "In a restaurant where he feels safe and loved, with a man who would sacrifice everything to protect him. In a home where nobody goes hungry or sleeps in the cold. That's worth more than any college fund. But what if Timothy gets sick again? What if you need medical care? What if—" Grace placed her weathered hands on either side of Vincent's face, forcing him to look directly into her eyes. "What if we stop living in fear and start living in faith? Faith that families take care of each other. Faith that love is stronger than money. Faith that we're exactly where we're supposed to be." Vincent felt tears spilling down his cheeks. "I don't deserve this. I don't deserve either of you." "Deserve?" Grace laughed, though tears streamed down her own face. "Child, love isn't about deserving. It's about choosing. You chose us when we were strangers shivering on a street corner. You chose Timothy when he was just a sick little boy with no claim on your heart. Now we're choosing you." From Timothy's room came the sound of a small voice calling out, "Nana? Mr. Vincent? Where are you?" They rushed inside to find Timothy sitting up in bed, his eyes clear and bright for the first time in days. When he saw them, his face lit up with the kind of pure joy that makes everything else seem small and manageable. "I had the most amazing dream," he said, his words tumbling over each other with excitement. "We were all at the restaurant, and it was packed with people, and there was music and laughing, and you were cooking, and Nana was taking orders, and I was drawing pictures for all the kids who came to eat." He looked between them, confusion creeping into his expression as he noticed their tear-stained faces. "Why are you both crying? Are you sad because I got sick?" "I'm sorry I got sick. I tried really hard not to." Vincent sat down on the edge of the hospital bed and pulled Timothy into a gentle hug. "We're not sad, son. We love you very much." Timothy hugged him back fiercely. "I love you too, Daddy Vincent. And I love Nana Grace. We're a real family now, aren't we?" The word daddy hit Vincent like lightning. He looked at Grace over Timothy's head, and she nodded with a smile that transformed her entire face. "Yes," Vincent said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're a real family." That evening, while Timothy napped, Vincent and Grace sat in the hospital cafeteria making plans. Grace had insisted on calling Castellano herself, arranging to meet him at Romano's the next morning with the full payment. Vincent had protested, but Grace's determination was unshakable. "This is my choice," she said firmly. "My money, my decision. Sarah's money is going to save her son's home and his father's dream. If that's not what inheritance is for, I don't know what is." Vincent stared into his coffee cup, overwhelmed by the magnitude of her sacrifice. "I'll pay you back. Every penny. I'll work for the rest of my life, if I have to." Grace reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "Vincent, this isn't a loan. This is an investment in our family, in our future, in the life we're going to build together." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "There's something else. I want to be a partner in the restaurant. Not just someone living in the back room, but a real partner. I've been managing the books, organizing the supplies, handling the customers. I know this business now, and I know what it could become." Vincent looked up sharply. "Grace, I'm not asking for charity," she said quickly. "I'm offering to buy in. $50,000 for a 50% stake in Romano's family kitchen. Fair market value for a struggling restaurant with good potential." The idea took Vincent's breath away. "You'd really want that? To be tied to a place that was nearly bankrupt?" Grace smiled, and in that smile Vincent saw strength that had carried her through unimaginable loss and hope that refused to be crushed by circumstance. "Vincent, I've been looking for a home for 3 years. Not just a place to sleep, but a real home where Timothy can grow up safe and loved, and where I can use my experience to help build something meaningful." She gestured toward the hospital room where Timothy slept peacefully. "That boy has been drawing pictures of our restaurant since the first night we stayed there. He sees it as his home, his future. And after what you did, spending your last dollar to save his life, I know there's no better place for us to invest in." Vincent felt something shift inside him, a sense of possibility he hadn't experienced in years. "Partners," he said slowly, testing the word. "Partners," Grace confirmed. "In business and in raising Timothy. In building something that's bigger than any of us could create alone." They shook hands across the cafeteria table, sealing an agreement that was about much more than money. It was about family, about second chances, about the kind of partnership that could weather any storm. The next morning, Castellano arrived at Romano's exactly on time, flanked by two associates who looked like they handled more than just paperwork. Vincent and Grace were waiting for them, the restaurant spotless and warm, the morning sun streaming through windows that gleamed with recent cleaning. Castellano swaggered in like he already owned the place, his expensive coat and predatory smile marking him as a man accustomed to getting what he wanted through intimidation and fear. Well, Castellano said, his voice dripping with mock surprise as he surveyed the clean restaurant. "Look at this place. Almost makes me sad to shut it down. You've been playing house instead of paying debts, Romano." Vincent's jaw clenched, but before he could respond, Grace stepped forward. Her posture was straight, her voice calm and clear. "Mr. Castellano, I presume Vincent doesn't have your money." Castellano's smile widened with cruel satisfaction. "That's what I figured. Boys, start looking around. See what we can salvage from this dump before we—" "But I do," Grace interrupted, her voice cutting through his gloating like a blade. The room went silent. Castellano's associates stopped moving, their boss's smirk faltering for the first time since he'd walked in. Vincent turned to stare at Grace, even though he knew what was coming. Grace reached into her coat and pulled out the worn envelope, thick with bills and bound with a rubber band that had held Timothy's future for 3 years. 43,000, wasn't it? Plus interest. Castellano's eyes fixed on the envelope with the focused intensity of a shark sensing blood in the water. "Call it 50,000, for the trouble you've caused me." Grace's hands trembled slightly as she pulled the rubber band loose, but her voice remained steady. 50,000 exactly. She began counting out bills in neat stacks on the counter, each one representing dreams deferred and sacrifices made. "Grace, no," Vincent said desperately, stepping forward. His voice cracked with the weight of what she was doing. "This is Timothy's college money, his inheritance from his mother. I can't let you." Grace turned to him, her eyes blazing with fierce determination. "You gave everything to save Timothy's life. You spent money you needed for this place because you couldn't bear to see him suffer. That little boy lying in the hospital calls you daddy now. You think I'm going to let some loan shark take away his home?" She continued counting, her weathered hands moving with steady precision. "This money has been a burden for 3 years. A reminder of what I lost, what Timothy lost. But here now, it becomes something beautiful. It saves the family we chose." Castellano watched the growing stacks of cash with obvious greed, but something like grudging respect crossed his face. "Hell of a thing, old woman, standing by each other like that." When Grace finished counting, $50,000 lay spread across the counter in neat piles. The loan shark's associates moved forward to collect it, their practiced efficiency making it clear this wasn't their first foreclosure. "Debt's clear," Castellano said after his men had verified the count. "Place is yours free and clear now, Romano. No more interest, no more payments." He paused at the door, looking back with something that might have been admiration. "You got yourself a hell of a family there." The moment they were gone, the restaurant felt different. Lighter. Free. Vincent sank into a booth, staring at Grace as she calmly folded the empty envelope and slipped it back into her pocket. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That money was all you had. All Timothy had." Grace sat across from him, her hands folded with quiet dignity. "No," she said softly. "All we had was each other. The money was just paper. This," she gestured around at the clean restaurant, at the drawings Timothy had taped to the walls, at the home they had built together. "This is what we have now." Vincent felt tears burning his eyes. "I don't know how to repay you." $50,000. "You already have repaid me," Grace interrupted. "You gave us a family. You treated Timothy like your own son from the moment you met him. You sacrificed everything to save his life." Her voice softened. "I raised 5 children, Vincent. Buried 2. Lost my husband to cancer. I thought I had endured everything life could throw at me. But watching Timothy go hungry, watching him shiver in doorways, that broke me in ways I didn't think possible. She leaned forward, her eyes shining with unshed tears. You treated him like he was precious, like he mattered, like he was worth saving. Do you know how rare that is? How many people would have walked past us on that street corner? From upstairs came the sound of small footsteps and a voice calling down. Nana? Daddy Vincent? Are we still here? Did the bad men take our home? Grace smiled through her tears. No, sweetheart. We're still here. We're all still here. Timothy appeared at the top of the stairs, still wearing his hospital bracelet, but looking stronger than he had in days. His face lit up when he saw them, and he bounded down the steps with the resilience that only children possess. I heard voices, he said, climbing into the booth beside Vincent. Were those the men who wanted to take our restaurant away? Vincent pulled Timothy close, marveling how natural the gesture felt. They were, son, but they're gone now. This is our home, and nobody's going to take it away from us. Timothy's eyes widened with wonder. Really? We get to stay forever? Forever, Grace confirmed, her voice thick with emotion. Timothy launched himself across the table to hug his grandmother, then scrambled back to Vincent's side. Does this mean I can pay my room upstairs? And can we put up more pictures of the restaurant? And can I help make pancakes for the customers? Vincent laughed, the sound rusty from disuse but genuine. We could do all of that and more. That afternoon, while Timothy napped upstairs, Vincent and Grace sat in the restaurant making plans for their future. The lunch crowd had been small but steady, and for the first time in months, Vincent felt hopeful about Romano's prospects. We need to make this official, Grace said, spreading papers across a clean table. Partnership agreements, custody arrangements for Timothy, business plans. Vincent looked up from the receipt book he'd been organizing. You're really serious about this? About being partners? Dead serious, Grace replied. I've been thinking about this since that first morning when I cleaned this place. I see potential here that you're too close to recognize. Good location, authentic food, a story that people want to be part of. She pulled out a notebook filled with her careful handwriting. I've been keeping notes. Customer preferences, supply costs, staffing needs. With the right marketing and some strategic changes, we could triple our revenue within a year. Vincent stared at the notebook, amazed by the thoroughness of her planning. You did all this while I was worried about paying bills. Someone had to think about the future instead of just surviving day to day, Grace said with a gentle smile. That's what partners do. They complement each other's strengths. Over the following weeks, Romano's family kitchen began its transformation. Grace's business acumen combined with Vincent's culinary skills created something neither could have achieved alone. They instituted family-style dinners on Sundays, turning the restaurant into a community gathering place. Grace organized cooking classes for local kids, with Timothy as her enthusiastic assistant. The story of their unlikely family spread through the neighborhood and beyond. Local newspapers picked up the tale of the restaurant owner who had sacrificed everything to save a homeless child, and the grandmother who had given up her life savings to preserve their newfound home. The publicity brought curious customers from across the city, but more importantly, it brought a sense of purpose that Vincent had lost when his father died. 3 months after that terrible night in the hospital, Romano's family kitchen had become the heart of its neighborhood. The morning rush brought familiar faces and new ones alike. Mrs. Chun from the corner market brought her grandchildren every Sunday after church. The construction crew from the high-rise project down the street made Romano's their regular lunch stop. College students discovered that authentic Italian food could be affordable and filling. But more than success, the restaurant had become something the community had been missing, a sanctuary. On Saturday mornings, Vincent opened early, not for paying customers, but for anyone who needed a warm meal and didn't have the money to pay. The homeless men who had once shuffled past the windows now had a corner table reserved for them. Single mothers came for free breakfast before school. Elderly neighbors who lived alone found company over hot coffee and Vincent's famous biscotti. Grace managed this outreach with quiet efficiency, turning compassion into a sustainable system. She organized food drives, coordinated with local social services, and somehow made the numbers work without bankrupting their growing business. We're not running a charity, she told Vincent one evening as they cleaned up after a particularly busy day. We're running a family business, and families take care of each other. Vincent paused in his wiping down of tables, looking around the room that had been transformed not just physically, but spiritually. The walls now held not only Timothy's drawings, but photos from customers, thank you notes from people whose lives have been touched, and a bulletin board where neighbors posted job openings, apartment listings, and offers to help each other. Papa would be proud, Grace said softly, following his gaze. This place is hard again, real hard. That night, after Timothy had gone to bed and Grace had retired to her room upstairs, Vincent sat alone in the restaurant. But it wasn't the lonely silence he had known before his family arrived. This was the peaceful quiet after a full day, the satisfied hum of a place that was loved and alive. He picked up Timothy's newest drawing, a family portrait showing the three of them in chef's hats, surrounded by smiling customers of every age and color. At the bottom, in increasingly confident handwriting, Timothy had written, "The Romano Washington Family Restaurant, where love is the secret ingredient." Vincent smiled and pinned it to the wall next to all the others. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight he was content to rest in the knowledge that they had built something worth keeping. On a snowy evening in December, exactly 1 year after that first night when he had found Grace and Timothy shivering on a street corner, Vincent stood in the doorway of Romano's watching the dinner crowd. Every table was full, conversations and laughter filling the air with warmth that had nothing to do with the heating system. At a corner table, Grace helped a young mother fill out job applications while her toddler colored with crayons Timothy had shared. Near the window, 3 elderly men played chess over cups of coffee that had been refilled so many times Vincent had lost count. A group of teenagers did homework together, occasionally calling out math questions to Grace, who seemed to have an endless supply of patience and surprisingly sharp algebra skills. Timothy, now 9 and healthy, moved between tables like a miniature host, refilling water glasses and chatting with customers who had become extended family. He wore a child-sized apron that Grace had sewn for him, embroidered with "Future Chef" in bright red thread. "Daddy Vincent," Timothy called out, his voice carrying easily over the dinner conversation. "Table 6 wants to know if you can make that special pasta sauce from your great-grandmother's recipe, the one with the secret ingredient." Vincent grinned and called back, "Tell them it'll be ready in 20 minutes. And Timothy, yeah, the secret ingredient is love, remember?" Timothy giggled and nodded seriously. "I remember. Love makes everything taste better." As Vincent headed to the kitchen to start the sauce, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a food critic who had heard about Romano's and wanted to schedule a visit. A year ago, that message would have terrified him. The fear of judgment, of not being good enough, of failing his father's legacy. Now, he simply smiled and deleted the message. They didn't need a critic's approval. They had something more valuable, a community that loved them, a family that had chosen each other, and the knowledge that they were exactly where they belonged. That night, after closing, the 3 of them sat around the kitchen table upstairs, sharing hot chocolate and planning for the future. Timothy was sketching designs for t-shirts he wanted to sell with the restaurant's logo. Grace was reviewing applications from 3 people who wanted to work at Romano's. Their success had finally reached the point where they needed help. "I have an announcement," Grace said, setting down her mug with ceremonial gravity. Timothy and Vincent looked up expectantly. "I've been accepted to the community college business program," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "Part-time classes, designed for working adults. I want to get my degree in restaurant management. Make this partnership even more official." Timothy cheered and clapped his hands. "Nana's going to college. That's so cool." Vincent felt his chest swell with pride. "Grace, that's incredible. But are you sure? The program costs are covered by a scholarship for non-traditional students." Grace interrupted with a satisfied smile. "Apparently, a 72-year-old grandmother starting college makes for good publicity." She reached across the table and squeezed Vincent's hand. "We've built something beautiful here, something that's going to outlast all of us. I want to make sure I have all the tools to help it grow." Vincent squeezed back, overwhelmed by gratitude for the 2 people who had transformed his life so completely. "What did I do to deserve a family like this?" "You opened your door," Timothy said seriously, his young face solemn with the wisdom children sometimes possess. "When we were cold and scared, you opened your door and let us in. That's what good daddies do." Grace nodded in agreement. And that's what good people do. They see someone in need, and they help, even when they don't have much themselves. As they prepared for bed that night, Vincent stood at his bedroom window, looking down at the street where he had first encountered Grace and Timothy. The corner where they had huddled under that thin blanket was now illuminated by a streetlight that the neighborhood association had installed after Romano's success brought more foot traffic to the area. He thought about that version of himself from a year ago, desperate, alone, convinced he was a failure. That man could never have imagined the life he now lived, the family he now had, the community he had helped create. His father's chef knife sat on his dresser, no longer a symbol of failure, but a reminder of continuity. 3 generations of Romano men had used that blade to feed families, and now a 4th generation, Timothy, who had started asking for cooking lessons, would learn to do the same. On his nightstand sat a framed photo from Timothy's school presentation about families. The assignment had been to bring in pictures and talk about what made their family special. Timothy had brought photos of the 3 of them cooking together, serving meals to neighbors, laughing over dinner in their apartment upstairs. But the centerpiece had been his drawing of that first night. 3 figures standing together in front of Romano's, the moment when strangers had become family. According to Grace, who had attended the presentation, Timothy had told his class, "Family isn't just about who you're born to. Sometimes family is about who chooses to love you and who you choose to love back." Vincent smiled, remembering his own words from that first night. Sometimes the biggest home isn't built with 4 walls and a roof. Sometimes it's built in the heart of someone who has nothing left but still chooses to give. He had thought he was giving Grace and Timothy shelter. Instead, they had given him something infinitely more valuable: purpose, love, and the understanding that success isn't measured in dollars but in the lives you touch and the family you build along the way. Romano's family kitchen was no longer just a restaurant. It was a testament to the power of choosing love over fear, community over isolation, and hope over despair. It was proof that sometimes the most broken people can create the most beautiful things when they come together with open hearts and willing hands. Vincent closed his eyes and listened to the sounds of his family settling in for the night. Grace reading quietly in her room, Timothy's soft breathing from across the hall, the old building creaking with the weight of dreams fulfilled. Tomorrow would bring new customers, new challenges, new opportunities to serve their community and strengthen their bonds. But tonight, he was simply grateful for the lesson that had taken him 43 years to learn, that the richest life isn't built on what you accumulate, but on what you're willing to give away. And sometimes, when you give everything you have to save someone else, you discover that you haven't lost anything at all. You finally found what you were looking for. The neon sign of Romano's family kitchen flickered one last time before shutting off for the night. But the warmth inside continued to glow, the kind of warmth that comes from love shared, lives touched, and a family that proves every single day that the most beautiful things in life are built one meal, one moment, one act of kindness at a time. Because in the end, that's what it means to truly succeed, to create something bigger than yourself, something that makes the world a little warmer, a little kinder, and a little more like home for everyone who walks through your door. If this story of love, sacrifice, and the power of chosen family touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more inspiring stories that remind us what truly matters in life. Share this with someone who needs to remember that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the people who choose to stand by you when the world gets cold. See you in the next video.